The inventory listed her fourth from the bottom, beneath the dairy herd, beneath the kitchen copper, beneath a broken pump handle valued at 6 shillings, as if she were a fixture that had been overlooked in previous audits and included now out of administrative tidiness. One line in the estate clerk's cramped hand: Bet, seamstress, under bond of indenture, no issue, no claim, to pass with the household on sale. Value, £4. She had read it herself, standing in the corridor outside the estate office, with the door ajar and the ledger propped open on the desk within. She could have pretended she hadn't seen it. She had spent 3 years at Darne Hall learning to pretend, learning which floorboards to avoid after midnight, which questions to answer with a murmur, and which with silence, how to make herself useful enough to keep and invisible enough to be forgotten. But she had seen it, and the seeing of it settled into her like water into stone, slow, cold, irreversible. Her name was not Bet. Her name was Elisabet Annesley Darne, and the estate that was about to sell her with its broken pump handle and its dairy herd had been built by her grandfather and left to her father and ought, by every right her father had died believing in, to have come to her. She was 20 years old. She had been no one for 12 of them. The morning the Marquess of Aldenvere arrived, Lisbeth was in the linen room on the 2nd floor, mending the hem of a curtain that Sir Bevel Wace had ordered repaired before the sale. Wace had opinions about presentation. He had managed Darne Hall for 14 years, first as the estate's solicitor after old Miss Darne died, then as its de facto steward under Radnor Keene, who had inherited everything on paper and appeared in person twice a year to collect his accounting and drink the good wine. Wace was the kind of man who believed he ran things because he could not imagine things running without him. He was not wrong, exactly. He simply did not acknowledge that what he ran had never belonged to him. Lisbeth heard the carriage before she saw it. She set down her needle and crossed to the window, and what she saw made her go very still. The coach was plain. Not plain in the way of economy, but plain in the way of indifference. A black vehicle with no crest on the door, drawn by matched grays of the sort that cost more than most men earned in a year. A man who needed you to understand his wealth announced it. A man who already understood it himself did not bother. She watched Sir Bevel Wace come out onto the front steps, too quickly, adjusting his cuffs as he walked. She had never seen him move quickly before. The Marquess of Aldenvere was younger than she had expected, and he did not look at the house. He looked at the property lines. That was the first thing she noticed. Not the greeting, not the tour of the reception rooms that Wace was already narrating from the doorstep, but the way the Marquess paused at the edge of the drive and turned to study the land to the east, the meadow that ran up against the old stone boundary wall, with an expression of quiet, concentrated attention. He held a folded paper in his left hand. He did not open it. He simply looked at the boundary wall for the length of 3 breaths, and then he turned and walked into the house, and Wace scrambled to follow. Lisbeth left the linen room. She had not been told to leave, and she had not been told to stay, and in 3 years she had learned that the most useful place to be was the place no one had thought to exclude her from. They had laid the inventory on the library table for the Marquess's inspection. Wace stood at his elbow, explaining the quality of the cattle, the recent repairs to the tenant cottages, the estimated value of the timber stand in the East Wood. The Marquess was not listening. He had picked up the inventory and was reading it. He read the way Lisbeth mended, methodically, without impatience, each line given its full attention before moving to the next. Wace kept talking. The estate clerk hovered. 2 men from the solicitor's office in town stood near the window with their coats still on, their leather folders pressed to their chests like shields. Lisbeth stood at the back of the room near the door, her mending basket over her arm. A woman with a mending basket had a reason to pass through a library. A woman without one did not. The Marquess turned the page, then the next. Then he came to the end of the inventory, and he stopped. She watched him read the last line, watched his eyes move, and then, slowly, with the deliberate quality of a man who does not trust what he has just seen, she watched him read it a second time. The library went quiet. Wace noticed the silence where his own voice had been and let it trail off. The solicitors shifted. The clerk cleared his throat and then wished he hadn't. The Marquess set the inventory down. He looked up. His gaze moved across the room, past Wace, past the solicitors, past the clerk, until it came to rest on the woman in the gray working dress standing near the door with a mending basket over her arm. He held it for the length of one breath. Lisbeth did not look away, though every trained instinct told her to. She was very tired of looking away. Something crossed his face. She could not name it. Then he spoke, and his voice was quiet enough that it should not have carried, and yet it reached every corner of that room. "Bring me a pen." Wace brought it himself. That told her something. She did not stay to watch what the Marquess wrote. She went back to the linen room, because her hands were shaking, and she needed something to do with them, and because she did not yet know whether the cold feeling in her chest was fear, or the first edge of something she had almost given up expecting. It was Hetty who found her. The cook had been at Darne Hall longer than anyone, longer than Wace, longer than any of the current household staff, certainly longer than Lisbeth. She was a broad, slow-moving woman who spoke rarely and noticed everything, and she came into the linen room without knocking and closed the door behind her and looked at Lisbeth for a long moment before she said anything. "He asked about the indenture bond," Hetty said. "Sent his man to the records room to pull the original document. Wace is with him now, and he doesn't look comfortable." Lisbeth set down the curtain. What did Wace tell him? Nothing useful. The Marquess isn't asking Wace. She crossed the room and lowered herself onto the trunk by the window. "He's asking for you." The silence stretched. "Hetty," Lisbeth said carefully, "I've known for 2 years." The cook did not look away. "I held my tongue because I didn't know what speaking would do for you, and a girl is better off not knowing what she's lost if there's no getting it back." A pause. "Your mother used to trace the initials on the kitchen table when she was thinking. EAD, carved in the corner. You do the same thing, and you don't even know you're doing it." Lisbeth's hand had gone to the table's edge without her realizing it. "There's getting it back," Hetty said. "Or there might be. Go to him with your head up. Answer him straight. Whatever you have that proves who you are, tell him you have it. A man who reads a document that carefully and then asks for a pen is not a man who means to let it lie." The Marquess received her in the library alone, with the door closed. He was standing when she came in, and he did not sit until she did, until he had drawn out the chair across from his own and gestured toward it with the quiet authority of a man accustomed to making people comfortable without making a production of it. She sat, because her legs had not been entirely reliable since she left the linen room, and because no one had held a chair for her in a very long time. "You know who I am," he said. "You are the Marquess of Aldenvere, my lord." "And do you know why I've asked to see you?" "No, my lord." He studied her for a moment. It was not a look she recognized, not the look of assessment she'd learned to tolerate from Wace, nor the dismissive glance of men who looked at servants the way they looked at furniture. It was the look of a man checking something against a memory, holding what was before him up to some internal standard and finding, from the quality of his stillness, that it matched. "I came to Darne Hall," he said, "because 3 months ago I purchased a parcel of land at auction. The survey documentation was forged. The plat bore my late father's professional seal, but the signatures on the secondary filings were not his. Following the chain of those forgeries brought me here to the estate records of the late Mr. Darne, where the same falsifications appear across a series of land transfers dated 14 years ago. He paused. Do you understand what I'm telling you? You came for the land records, she said, not for the estate. That is correct. I came expecting to find a paperwork discrepancy. I did not expect to find what I found in the inventory. He reached inside his coat and produced a folded sheet, not the inventory, but a smaller document, the kind carried close. He unfolded it and set it on the table between them. It was the original indenture bond, stamped with the county seal. He turned it to face her and placed his finger beneath the last line of the signatory section, where a name had been written in full legal form. Elisabet Annesley Darne. The bond was drawn in that name, he said, not Bet, the full legal name with the family patronym. The man who drafted it used the girl's real name, perhaps because he needed it to match the birth record, or perhaps because after 12 years he had simply forgotten it was ever dangerous. His voice was even, without judgment. I knew that name, because my father kept the Darne family's legal files before he died, and among those files was a record of the daughter born to the late Mr. Darne and his wife, and a question my father was never able to resolve before his death, a question about whether the child recorded as dead in the parish register had in fact been witnessed dying by anyone at all. Lisbeth could not speak. I came here looking for forged land surveys, the Marquess said. I did not expect to find a forged death. It wasn't a forgery, she said, and her voice came out steadier than it had any right to. It was a lie, which is different. A forgery requires craft. What they did only required no one to look closely. He was quiet for a moment. Something in his expression shifted. Tell me what you remember of the day you arrived here. She told him all of it, the workhouse, the years before that, in a succession of placements she had been too young to fully understand. The woman who had driven her to the workhouse gate in a hired cart and given her, before climbing back up, a small flat parcel wrapped in oilcloth. Keep this hidden, the woman had said. Don't show anyone. It's yours and no one else's. She had not known who the woman was. She had done as she was told. She had kept it hidden for 12 years. The Marquess reached into his coat again. He removed something small and held it out to her on his open palm, and the floor shifted beneath Lisbeth's feet because she knew what she was looking at. It was a watercolor miniature in an oval frame, painted on ivory, small enough to fit in a closed fist. The portrait was of a woman, dark-haired, fine-featured, in the style of 30 years past. My father kept this, the Marquess said quietly. Given to him by the Darne solicitor at the time of the estate's transfer, described as a token from the family. He left it to me. I have carried it because I could not reconcile it with the death record. Lisbeth rose without meaning to. There are 2 of them, she said. My mother commissioned matching portraits when I was 5, one of her, one of me. She said it was so we could keep each other's face. She met his eyes. The one of me is in my room, in the false bottom of my sewing box. It has my name on the back, in my father's hand. The Marquess rose. At that moment, the library door opened, and Sir Bevil Wace came in with his papers and his practiced ease, and his eyes moved very quickly from the Marquess to the woman standing beside the library table and back again, and something in his expression, some fraction of the smoothness, cracked. What happened next was clean and terrible, and, Lisbeth thought afterward, inevitable. The Marquess laid out what he knew about the land surveys, the forged plats, his father's stolen seal, the chain of falsifications terminating in this estate's own records. He did it without raising his voice, the way a man does when he has had a long time to prepare for a conversation and no longer needs anger to give it weight. Wace denied it. Then he equivocated. Then, when the Marquess produced a copy of the original survey bearing date discrepancies that could only be explained by a filing that had not yet been commissioned, when the seal was applied, he went quiet in the way of a man recalculating everything he thought he still controlled. "Take the land dispute to your lawyers," Wace said finally. "I'll not fight you on it. But leave the girl. She's no one. She's been no one for 12 years, and she'll continue to be no one, and dragging her into a court will do her more harm than good." He glanced at Lisbeth with an expression she recognized, the look of a man weighing something that was no longer fully within his reach. "There are people with an interest in this arrangement, Aldenvere. People with resources and patience. If you pursue this, they will bury it, and they will bury her with it, and you will have made enemies over a servant girl and a disputed title." "Over a servant girl," the Marquess repeated, "and a title, and 12 years of payments from Radnor Keene's estate accounts to yours, which I expect my lawyers will find very thoroughly documented in your own ledgers once they have cause to examine them." The color left Wace's face slowly, the way water recedes from stone. He collected his papers. He left, too calmly, with the deliberate steadiness of a man who has already decided what he is going to do next, and is simply finishing his current sentence first. Lisbeth went upstairs. She already knew. The sewing box was open on the bed, its false bottom lifted. The oilcloth parcel was gone. She stood in the room where she had slept for 3 years, and looked at the empty hollow and thought of the woman's face in the small painting. A face she had studied in private for 12 years, trying to remember, never quite managing, and felt the loss of it like a door closing in a room she had just found the key to. Then she went downstairs and told the Marquess, and he looked out the window at the drive, and he did not chase the carriage. "Why aren't you going after him?" she asked. "Because he wants me to," the Marquess said. "He wants me on a public road with no warrant, recovering by force an object he'll swear he's never seen. He wants the story to become about what I did rather than what he did." He turned from the window. His face was steady. "He's frightened. A man who wasn't frightened would have stayed and brazened it out. A man who runs to warn his principals is a man who knows the ground has shifted." The portrait was the only proof that couldn't be manufactured after the fact. "It was not the only proof," the Marquess said quietly. "It was the clearest proof. There is a difference." He did not explain what he meant. Not yet. What followed was 2 weeks of legal preparation, and then the arrival of Radnor Keene's lawyers, who were very good lawyers and very well prepared, and the documents they produced were certified and sealed and 12 years old, and from a distance they formed a picture that was entirely convincing. The girl, they wrote, had learned the family history through proximity to the estate's records. She had, with Wace's coaching, and Wace, they noted, had proven himself an unreliable party and was being formally removed from any position of trust, constructed a claim to an identity that the parish register clearly showed, had died of fever in the winter of her 8th year. The death was documented, witnessed, and sealed. Any portrait produced on the claimant's behalf should be regarded as fabricated. Any indenture bond naming Elisabet Darne should be regarded as an administrative error, incorrectly transcribed by a careless clerk from an old file. The Marquess read Keene's response in the library and was quiet for a long time after. "They've had 12 years, he said. "I have had 3 weeks. Every document I produce, they have an older one to answer it. Every witness I call, they can call more and pay them better." He set the letter down. The portrait was the one piece of evidence they could not have anticipated and poisoned in advance. And they have taken it. Lisbeth sat across from him in the chair he had drawn out for her on the first day. She had thought a great deal about that gesture in the weeks since. The simple, unremarkable act of holding out a chair for a woman he had only just met, treating it as the obvious thing to do. She had not understood until that moment how long she had been braced for the opposite. "They had 12 years, she said. "You had 3 weeks and 1 pen. He looked at her. "You wrote something on the inventory," she said, "that first day when you asked for the pen. I never saw what it was." He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his coat and produced the inventory, folded, worn at the creases from being carried close, and he smoothed it open on the table and turned it toward her. She read the last line first, her own line: "Bet, seamstress, under bond of indenture, no issue, no claim, to pass with the household on sale. Value, £4. Beneath it, in a different and firmer hand, she read what the Marquess of Aldenvere had written on the day he asked the clerk for a pen. "The indenture of any person named in this inventory is hereby declared void upon my acquisition of this estate. No person may be purchased as property. The individual designated above is taken into my protection as a free subject. Her legal status shall be determined at law, not by this ledger. The remainder of this estate I purchase in full. C. Holta, Marquess of Aldenvere." She read it once, then she read it again. "You wrote this on the first day," she said, "before you knew who I was, before the portraits, before the indenture bond, before any of it. I wrote it because what was written above it could not be signed beneath." His voice was even. It had nothing to do with what I suspected. It had to do with what was on the page. She understood then what he had done and why it mattered. Keene's entire scheme rested on one thing, that she was property. As long as she was property, a line in a ledger, a bond of indenture, a servant with no station and no claim, she could be moved, dismissed, transported to whatever court Keene controlled, buried under whatever verdict his money could purchase. Property had no standing. Property could not object. But 3 weeks before Keene's lawyers ever wrote their letter, before any writ had been issued, before Keene even understood that the game had begun, the Marquess of Aldenvere had filed a witnessed, signed, and legally registered instrument declaring her a free person. Not a claimant, not an impostor, a person with a question about her identity attached to her, awaiting an answer at law. Keene's scheme had been built to defeat a claim made afterward. It had not been built to defeat a declaration made before. The officers came 3 days later with a writ naming her a fraudulent claimant and ordering her removed to the city for questioning. The Marquess met them in the hall with the inventory in his hand. He read them the declaration. Then he asked the senior officer to read it himself, which the man did, twice, with the expression of someone who has stepped onto ice and is still deciding how far to trust it. "The writ names a bonded servant," the Marquess said. "There has been no bonded servant at this address since the date on that document. You are 3 weeks too late to serve a writ for property that was declared a free person before your court ever put pen to paper. If your principals wish to contest her legal status, they are welcome to do so in open court, where I will have questions of my own about forged land surveys, falsified death records, and 14 years of payments from the estate of Radnor Keene to the personal accounts of Sir Bevel Wace." The senior officer was still for a long time. "I'll carry it back," he said at last, "and let them decide in open court whether they've the stomach for it." He paused in the doorway and looked at Lisbeth, and something almost like respect crossed his weathered face before he turned and went out. They did not have the stomach for it. Wace was caught at a coaching inn 2 counties over, with a locked traveling case containing, among other things, the oilcloth parcel from the false bottom of Lisbeth's sewing box and a private ledger recording 12 years of payments under the notation EAD, maintenance and concealment. When presented with the choice between trial for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy, or a full accounting before the court, in exchange for a reduced sentence. He chose the accounting, and proved to have been carrying the weight of the secret long enough that the telling of it came with something very close to relief. Radnor Keene's certified documents did not survive the questions the Marquess's lawyers asked in open court. The physician who had signed the death certificate was shown to have signed 4 other convenient death records for Keene's interests over the same period. The parish registrar could not explain, when presented with his own original ledger, why the ink on the death entry was a different age from the surrounding entries on the same page. And the miniature portraits were placed side by side before the court, the mother's face and the daughter's, painted on matching ivory ovals by the same hand, in the same year, the same deep-set eyes, the same way of holding the head. On the back of the daughter's portrait, in the late Miss Darne's handwriting confirmed by 3 independent assessors, Elisabet Annesley, my heart, age 5 years. Beside it, the Marquess's father's files, kept intact through 2 decades, including the notation that had never been resolved. Child's death unwitnessed. Query clerk Re. Parish record. Follow up. He had not lived to follow up, his son had. Radnor Keene went to prison. The estate passed back to Elisabet Annesley Darne in a transfer that took 4 months to complete, and that she signed in her full legal name for the first time in 12 years, sitting at her father's desk in the library at Darne Hall, with her hand entirely steady. Hetty stayed. That had never been in question. The cook had lived at Darne Hall since before Lisbeth's parents married, and she intended, she said, to die in its kitchen, and she would thank everyone to stop making a fuss about it. She called Lisbeth by her full name now, Elisabet, with a briskness that suggested she had always been waiting for permission. The inventory hung framed on the library wall. Lisbeth had put it there herself, over the Marquess's gentle protest that it was an ugly document. "It's the truest thing written about this house in 14 years, she told him, and he conceded the point. The visitors who came to Darne Hall in the years that followed sometimes stopped before it and read the last 2 lines, and the better ones understood without being told that the same page held both the crime and its undoing, and that the undoing had been written first. Casimir Holte asked her plainly, on an afternoon in October, in the library where he had first drawn out a chair for her, because he was a man who had learned the weight of plain speaking and did not want to dilute it with ceremony. She said yes, for the same reason, and because there had never truly been any other answer, only the time required to be certain she was choosing from wholeness rather than from gratitude, and the time had arrived. They married in the small stone church near the eastern boundary wall in the spring, with Hetty in the front pew in her good wool coat, crying without the slightest apology. On the morning of the wedding, while Lisbeth was having her hair pinned, Hetty set down her comb and stood back, and regarded her with the particular satisfaction of a woman whose patience has been thoroughly vindicated. "I knew you the second week," the cook said. "The way you touched the kitchen table, your mother did the same." Lisbeth caught her hand. "You told me to go in with my head up," she said. "That was what mattered. I almost didn't. I almost talked myself out of going into that library at all. And if you had, then I would have been someone who stayed afraid of what she'd lost, rather than someone who went and found it." She turned back to the mirror. "You gave me that, before I knew what I was going to." Hetty made a sound that was not quite dismissive. "You always knew," she said. "You just needed someone to stop pretending you didn't." On the library table near the window, in the light of a clear May morning, lay the pen. Lisbeth had kept it, taken it quietly from the desk on the first day, slipped it into her mending basket the same way she had once slipped the oilcloth parcel into her coat. He had noticed and said nothing, because he understood the logic of keeping what had been yours when everything else was taken. She touched it now before going down. A clerk's pen, nothing remarkable, the kind carried in a coat pocket for practicality, used to sign what needed signing and returned without ceremony. She had not held it the day he used it. She had only watched. But she had understood even then, watching him bend over the inventory, in that silent room full of men who expected him to sign without reading, that what he was doing mattered in a way she could not yet name. She understood it now. He had not saved her with the pen. He had simply refused to sign his name beneath a lie, and in refusing, had written the one document in the whole affair that Keene's money could not predate, could not poison, could not reach, because it had been written before Keene knew there was anything left to bury. Below, in the garden, the Marquess stood at the edge of the stone path talking with the estate clerk, his dark head bent in the unhurried, attentive way he had with everyone, the same way he had bent over the inventory on the first day, reading to the bottom of a list where the cheap things went, the things beneath notice, the things passed along with broken pump handles, and assumed to have no further claim on anyone's attention. He looked up, as though he'd felt her watching. Lisbeth set the pen down and went to be married. Not the woman at the bottom of the ledger, not the debt that passed with the household, not £4 and a broken pump handle and a name written in ink that was never supposed to be found. Elisabet Annesley Darne of Darne Hall going down to begin.